I'm Jason Sadison, as she said, I'm a second-year PhD student. I'm in the integrative neuroscience program in the psychology department, which is right next door. I actually sort of vied to go first because I do a lot of research on this thing, and we sort of break our research into an applied setting, which I can tell you about at the very end. But then I thought it would make sense to start with sort of what happens in the lab and then how you can actually sort of help yourself in a real ecologically valid setting, because I am not a counselor. I am just a guy who looks at data, a lot of data. So it's fun. So last night I was sitting with a friend of mine in our apartment. We were just going over some data on a project that we're working with together. We were making a flow chart of things to do. We were trying to organize our time, and like we have finals next week. I have 3 all-day finals, which is just ridiculous. And at some point she asks me, she's really curious, she goes, "What are you working on?" And I just go, "Oh, I'm working on this proposal, and I'm working on this talk that I have to give tomorrow." And she goes, "What's the talk about?" And I go, "Well, it's about the interaction of stress and anxiety on performance." And there was like 20 seconds of silence of her like staring at me, and then she just started laughing hysterically. Because it's extremely ironic, and then I started laughing, and then like I felt like I wanted to cry. So I'm with you in spirit. But the lab, we were actually just right next door. I'm in the human performance lab, and the whole directive of the lab is to look at the impact of stress and anxiety on the brain, and then also how that impacts cognitive performance, and then essentially the output is just behavior. So when it all is said and done, what really matters is what you're putting out to people, and that's what we're really trying to see that we can help people with in the lab. So before I start, I'm just going to define some things, and I don't know if your working definitions are any different, but when I talk about stress and anxiety, we sort of separate the two things in the lab such that stress is more, it's actually a term borrowed from engineering, like a really, really long time ago. It was first described in human physiology to describe changes in the body over a long period of time. So he thought it was a really good analogy, the guy who wrote this paper, because the more weight that you added to a bridge, the more resistive force you'd get on it, and eventually you could get warping in the bridge from too much force. Too little force, you get wind come along, it would blow the metal to the side, would warp the bridge. So he sort of had this good term for like a good amount of stress that your body could handle. And then when we're overstressed, you sort of have these pervasive changes in behavior over time. But with anxiety, we think about it, we're not dualists, so like we don't have like a floating orb of mind around the brain. But we think of anxiety a little more psychologically. So from a psychological perspective, it's like the housing of worries and thoughts over a long period of time about something very specific. So in grad school, a lot of the people that I know have really, really poor or really, really effective writing anxiety. We're always writing things. They get into the situation where they have to write something, and they just have crippling thoughts about what they're going to be doing, about the outcomes, about the goals. And what we find is that throughout all of our research, no matter what type of anxiety you have, so I don't know like what program and department everybody's in, but like let's say you have writing anxiety and you have like math anxiety, regardless of the type of anxiety you have about something, it essentially affects your brain the exact same way. And how that is that you have a very specific network in your brain that's allocated to housing information. And what happens is when you're anxious, you're essentially housing information that you could be using towards something else. And so you have a competition between information. And we see massive behavioral deficits in individuals who have anxiety. When you put them in a testing situation, they just do really, really, really poor, which kind of stinks. And the problem is these anxieties contribute to maladaptive behavior over time. So let's say you have writing anxiety, for instance. I have terrible writing anxiety about like writing proposals for things. It leads to avoidant behavior, and then over a long period of time, I develop a pattern of behavior of avoiding the work altogether. My roommate, I asked him if I could tell you guys this, and he said it was fine, has really bad math anxiety for doing tips at restaurants. And he's so embarrassed if somebody's seeing him calculate a tip wrong that he does this thing where he gets out his phone and he'll pretend like he's texting someone, but he already has the calculator app open. So that when he gets the tip, he's like, "Oh, $25. Oh, $30 would be a 20%. I think it's hilarious. It's kind of cute. But yeah, it's just
so he plans ahead.
Yeah, he plans ahead so that he doesn't look like an idiot.
He's really invested.
Which in turn makes me think that he has even worse math anxiety than he does.
It's math anxiety.
Say it again.
Maybe. Oh, and it doesn't matter.
It was social anxiety.
Something.
Yeah. It's just really entertaining. And so you do see differential behavioral effects if you're anxious about something or if you just have chronic changes in your physiology, which is stress over time. And we sort of investigate in our lab the 2 different ways that those affect your performance, which is what is the meat and potatoes of this, is why any of this matters and how you can get rid of these problems in your life. So what we've done in the lab is we've all sort of researched how these things impact your behavioral performance. And so then we sort of asked the question of, well, how can we substantiate making people better over time, given that people have anxiety and stress. And so what we did is, a colleague of mine did this thing called expressive writing. So right before he went to his school, and he just said, it doesn't matter if you have anxiety or not, you just take some biology students. Give one group of individuals a normal class setup where they come and they take the test and see how they do. And the other group of individuals, he just gives them a sheet of paper and he says, go ahead and write. He doesn't tell them what to write about, he doesn't say anything at all, and he just tells them to write. And he sees a 15% boost in performance just telling people to write before they take a test. And specifically with individuals, that's across every single participant. Across individuals who have specific anxiety related to the test, you see an even increased performance such that they look like their counterparts that don't have anxiety about what they're doing. So it's a laboratory setting, or in this case, I guess it was a little more valid because it was a school setting. But it's one thing, and the theory behind it is that what you're really doing is you're having this writing task that is a focused attention task. And so we sort of ran with that, and we said, well, can this work with any participant, any type of anxiety, if you just give them a focused attention task? So across meditation, breathing, writing, right before you get yourself into a situation of acute anxiety, like if you have to go meet your advisor, if you have to take a test, or if you have to do like a data analysis, if you just do a focused attention task, your performance is always better afterwards. We don't really know why, but that's the statistically significant outcome, so take with that what you will. But the problem is that really is only changing behavioral effects for specific acute instances of anxiety, and so we don't know if over a longer period of time, like grad school, like the 5 years of hell that we go through, if it actually makes much of a long-term difference. So some recent research that I actually just read about last week essentially did a long-term study looking at threats and challenges over a long period of time. So they had people come in and they signed up for this really, really long study. And they said, at the end of the study, you're going to be tested on a very, very difficult task. Like, they've never played piano and they have to play Mozart or something like that. And if you gave one group of individuals the task and you framed it as if it was a challenge, their performance was astronomically larger than individuals if they were to think of it as a threat. So if you were to emphasize something like, you've never done this before, it's going to be really difficult for you, compared to somebody who's just like, oh no, you just have to increment your time over a long period of time to actually work yourself up to completing this challenge. We just see massive effects between the two in the laboratory setting.
Which is better?
Which is better?
The
challenge condition. Yeah. So if you were to actually think of long-term tasks as a challenge rather than a threat. And so now the thing that we have to do is find ways to get individuals to actually frame challenges in their life as challenges and not pervasively as threats. That goes with a lot of, we worked with a clinical lab in Michigan, which shows that like if you partition your time and you separate out tasks over a long period of time, and so are you really framing different parts of the tasks as challenges? Is that what they're doing, or is it the other way around? We don't know, but Did anybody have any questions about that? Or that's sort of my research and what I do, and I thought it was a good primer to actually relevant.
It's very interesting.
Relative
I would say we
applications.
are on the same page.
Good. So we don't argue about anything.
We talked amongst ourselves that Doug and I were saying, now what if he presents this research and like the stuff that we do isn't supported in the
Everything
research,
we know is
everything we
wrong.
know is wrong. And then Jason said that he had a similar kind of thought in the other way. That what if all the things that I'm saying, they're saying, no, that isn't going to work. So it seems like we're on the same page.
Yeah.
So essentially what you're saying is that we're all very anxious up here.
I know, that's how we manage it.
So my name's Doug Colbert. I'm a psychologist at Student Counseling, and I want to kind of build on that a little bit and kind of share a few things that we often find are helpful concepts for people to have in thinking about anxiety. And a lot of it is stuff you already know. Jason's kind of talking about how we're really building the science behind this to broaden it out. But there's some kind of common sense stuff that some of this will be reminders and some of it might be new. But what I find is that most people who are anxious, one component of it is a sense or a fear that something's out of control or something's going to get out of control. Another thing is that anxiety, it's important to remember, really is closely related to, it's wired into us, or rather the capacity for it, and it's closely related with that concept we call the fight or flight syndrome, which you've probably heard of. It's that way in which we're sort of wired, in a way that goes back for, at least thousands of years, probably more, and we share it with a lot of other animals. It's this whole complex of reactions that happen when we're threatened, and fight or flight. If most of these are this is such an old part of our experience and our biology that, it's built on old fears. So we don't really encounter a lot of bears in our lives these days. But, if you encounter a bear, you have to, the fight or flight syndrome prepares you for either outcome. You either have to punch the bear or you have to run away quickly. And in both cases, you need to rapidly manifest a lot of strength and power. And you do that by breathing rapidly, hyperventilating, get a lot of oxygen, your heart starts pounding, your blood vessels dilate so you can get this oxygenated blood out to your big muscle groups, which means you're redirecting it from your core functions, which is why when people are anxious, they might have a stomach ache because you're not as efficient, So all that's going on, and it happens so quickly. We're so good at it that often the first awareness that something might be wrong is the sensation that goes along with those feelings. In fact, when in the West, in the Western Hemisphere, when people were first writing about anxiety, say early 20th century, someone, actually I think it might have been Freud's daughter, came up with the term signal anxiety. It's just the signaling function of those sensations. And if that's all it does, that's great. We want to know when things are wrong. It's when anxiety is out of proportion to circumstances, or it goes on longer than it should, or it doesn't kind of abate when we get better data. For example, if we're sitting here and somebody starts to smell smoke and we think, well, I'm in this really old building, I'm not sure where the exit is, this is alarming. And then I tell you, well, on the way in I saw that they're doing some roof repair and they have a tar burner and that's all that is. Then you have an explanation for why you smell smoke and you should be able to calm down. But often, or sometimes at least, we don't, even though we get adjusted data. So our concerns are irrational, right? So I say all that by way of pointing out that there's two sides to anxiety. Some of it's physiological, we rev up, and some of it's cognitive. We have to make sense out of what we're experiencing and try and have it be rational and in proportion to the real threat. And that really gives us our intervention points for anxiety, at least in a practical way. If we can calm down the arousal, that's a good thing. How do we do that? We do it chemically. What do we say about beer? It takes the edge off. Do a shot, you change quickly. It's a depressant. People take medication. They, other things that will physiologically, chemically slow them down. But somebody might do, relaxation exercises, controlled breathing, mindfulness meditation. Taking a nap, all these things are kind of slow the body down some. So there's a bunch of things you can do with that. There are also things we can do cognitively, where we can learn through interventions like cognitive behavioral therapy, learn to how to sort of review our expectations, try and figure out if our thinking is rational, and in doing that, you get back a sense of control. And when you feel more in control and your body's not going, danger, Will Robinson, those two things together is going to help you to feel better. So that's kind of, I just want to put that out as kind of a working practical model that we often work with. And the other thing we might want to talk about before we're done here today is resilience. What do you do before the bear shows up in the room? What do we do just for good self-care? And we can talk about that too, because that's just really practical stuff. But I will pass on to Ann for now.
Practical stuff. So I'm Ann Brody. I'm also one of the psychologists at the Student Counseling Service. And one thing I want to say is, just to clarify that anxiety is not bad, that it is, as we're all saying, a natural, normal part of responsiveness. And, what we say in our kind of clinic sometimes is anxiety can be our friend. It's that, it's good to know if you're driving in your car and a dog runs in front of you, you quickly put on the brakes, and the reason you get that extra alertness and you react. It also, in terms of your work, lots of students will talk about the sort of extra rush of adrenaline you get as the deadline gets closer. And what students will sometimes say is, how can I harness that sooner? And then we, at part of our work with students, is, well, let's talk about how you can harness that sooner. What can you do? What kind of a commitment can you commit to someone with leverage? That's what I will tell students, often an advisor, not your best friend, someone who you will say, I'm going to get this to you on such and such a date, even though it's not due. But you've said that, and that helps you tap into that extra bit of focus that can come when you're aroused. So it becomes troublesome when, as Doug was saying, we're getting over aroused and aren't able to focus. So the right amount is good. Too much is going to interfere, and none at all is going to make it hard for us to have motivation. And so what I've noticed I think this is probably true of anyone, but I know it's true of our students, particularly our graduate students at the University of Chicago, is that when students get stuck and aren't doing their work, it is almost always because they feel overwhelmed. I have yet to meet the U of C student who doesn't care about the work. I mean, you're just not here for that. I mean, they care very much, and if people aren't doing what they would say they want to be doing, often it's out of some sense of becoming overwhelmed. And so our work with students then is, well, how can we help you look at what the tasks are in such a way so that they start to seem doable, where you can have just the right amount of arousal, right amount of anxiety, so that you can motivate yourself, but not so much so that you are, that's a deer in the headlights feeling of like, I don't even know where to start. It's human nature to back away from situations that create pain. So if when I sit down to do my work, I'm filled with dread and anxiety and, a sense of hopelessness, of course, I'm going to turn to something else. And it may be checking email, it may be doing work that isn't work. I mean, it's work, but not what I really have to be doing. It could be cleaning the kitchen. It could be eating brownies. I mean, something that gives me an immediate sense of comfort. Although those things don't really work well because there's always that sense of, oh, but I should be doing this other thing. So even if I'm doing something ostensibly to comfort myself, it doesn't work really well because I haven't made a clear, conscious choice. I'm not going to work on my paper right now. I'm going to go clean the kitchen. I sort of drift into doing the other thing. And then it feels as though time is not in my control. Like students will say to me lots of times when we're working on sort of creating time management and balance, and students will come in and say, well, I don't know what I did on Saturday. I don't know what I did. I didn't do work. And so well, let's start, what did you do? You did something. And they're like, I did nothing. And of course, yeah, something happened. But the problem with that is, and I don't believe these are not students that don't remember, really. It's just this sense of none of it counted. But even more than that, there's a sense of not being in control of it. It's a very passive approach to time. And what that means is, I don't have control, therefore I don't know how this is going to get done because I'm not the one in control. So part of my work with students then is, well, how can we help you recognize that you are making choices? And I have some tips and ideas about that I can talk about if we want to. But before I get into some of the thoughts I have of things that could be helpful, I would like to hear from you guys. Like, how do you know if you're anxious? What happens? Anybody? How do you know if you're stressed? Yeah.
I mean, it usually takes a physical toll.
It takes a physical toll?
Physical toll. I get stomach aches.
Okay.
I get hair loss issues.
Okay. Okay.
So I guess I can feel it physically.
You feel it physically. Okay. And is that, and you may not be able to answer this, but is that your first cue? One of, like, you kind of are going along, and then when you start actually feeling sick is when you, physically sick, you realize, oh, I'm really anxious.
I guess it's probably when it becomes most apparent. I mean,
Most apparent.
I'm sure there
Okay.
are other cues earlier on that I'm probably not.
But that's one that comes to mind right away. Yeah. Anybody else?
Try very quickly to mentally change the subjects in my mind, where if I'm thinking something that's uncomfortable, I immediately am like I'll actively force a different thought into my brain. So I can tell that, like, oh wow, that was anxious. And it must make me anxious because I can't even think about that right now.
Yeah, right. That's backing away from it because that's I don't want to be near that thought because it's making me anxious. Yeah. Yeah. Or go ahead.
I find that I get more easily distracted.
Yes.
Yeah, so just like, I'll be reading and then realize halfway through the paragraph I was somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Or trying to write and just sort of inventing other things to worry about.
Yeah, inventing, easily distracted, I think that's it. And inventing these other things to worry about, like, oh gosh, I haven't checked my credit rating, and I'm supposed to do that 4 times a year. I better do that. Things like this that, like, it's, yeah, and you.
Basically, yeah, all of that.
Yeah, all of that.
Yes. Yeah.
I want to comment on your physiology experience, you know, and we all, you know, we know, like the things I was saying, your body does certain things, but also I think there are, there's a whole continuum of indications of things
Yeah.
we could notice.
Right.
A lot of times we're so driven, we kind of try and barrel through, and then, you know, the body and mind keep sort of upping the ante until we notice it. you know.
Right, right, yeah. And then my next question is, so I imagine all of us have some way where we do know that there's some stress and anxiety. What helps? What helps? Yeah.
All of these comments, I'm really glad I'm here because I
Uh-huh.
realize I'm not an anomaly.
No, right.
This is what
Welcome to the
what
human
everyone's
race.
saying,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
relate to it. And one thing that you mentioned last that I wanted to mention first is the time management and balance.
Yeah.
And making choices. What I've realized over the last couple of weeks, Emily and I are working together in a seminar, you know. We have different projects, but we've decided to commit our time together in a place in the library where we have some responsibility in the group.
That's a great
And
idea.
so we're able to, we time our writing, and so we're taking charge of our commitment to time. And I think that over the last couple of weeks is what's made me stop feeling sick all the time. Every time I would sit down, I would literally feel like I was going to throw up.
Yeah.
And my hair
Yeah.
is grayer than it was
Yeah.
in September.
Yeah.
I kid you not. It really
This is not an unusual experience.
and so, you know, taking charge of my own time and then realizing that I'm committing that 5 hours a day,
Mhm.
and so I can do other
Yeah,
things.
yeah. The only thing I say, you're not only taking charge, you're recognizing you are in charge of your
Yeah.
time. You're always making choices. It's when we don't recognize that that's what we're doing that it feels out of our control. And when we recognize I can choose to sit here and write for 20 minutes, and if I'm starting to feel anxious or sick, I can choose to stop, and I can choose to answer email for a while or look at Facebook or whatever else I'm doing, but just to recognize that I'm consciously doing that. And I often suggest if that happens inadvertently, you don't, because sometimes you don't know until after your attention has shifted, and then you realize, oh, I must have been anxious, I'm looking at Facebook, who cares, you know, but I'm into it. Then I will say just set a timer for 15 minutes, and when the timer goes off, just all that I ask is that you ask yourself, do I want to keep looking at status updates about my friends and what fabulous lives they're having, or do I want to go back to my work? And I may actually make a decision, no, this is interesting to me, it's kind of fun, and I want to keep, you know, doing Facebook is the example I'm using, but then set the timer for another 15 minutes. And the reason is actually not so much about interrupting the distraction as much as reminding the self that you are making choices, and that means you can choose to go back to your work. Time isn't just stolen in a passive way, even though I know it can feel like that sometimes. I'm always making choices, and the strategy that the two of you came up with about having a commitment with each other, making decisions about when you're writing, all of that is helping you recognize that you're in charge, and that's often very helpful.
It's also helped me sleep.
Sleep is good.
Because when I'm out of control, when I don't control my own time and I'm not aware of my choices
Yeah.
about time, then late at night, when the day has slipped away, is when I realize I've squandered an opportunity. And so now all of a sudden at 3 in the morning when I shake myself awake, I feel like I need to go do something.
Yeah.
But now that I commit time
Yeah.
and I make a choice,
Exactly.
then when I wake up at 3, I literally tell myself, that's tomorrow at 10 in the morning. I
Right.
need to sleep now. And it works.
Yeah.
I think a lot of what you're saying is additionally important because of the nature of the graduate student role. Your work is never done. You come here and everything, there's always something remaining to be
Right.
done for the next how many years, 5 years is optimistic.
No. 5 years is what's
Anxiety's
going to
going
happen.
on.
And so, whether it's 5 or
It's
longer.
reinforcing to tell yourself that.
It's a challenge, not a threat.
But to impose some structure in there, just makes life more manageable. Then I think it's important to think about what are my reference points, because often students come to me and say, well, I'm trying to work 6 hours a day. But if what you're thinking is, my friends have jobs where they work 8 hours a day, they're not working 8 hours a day. You show up for 8 hours, you go to the water cooler, you take a break, call your friends, check Facebook, you get some work done during the day. But when when any of you actually sit down and you write for 3 hours, that's a big chunk
It's
of
a
work.
huge
And it's important to remember that.
concentration time.
We might also want to take some time, if we have it towards the end, and talk specifically about sleep and what supports
Actually, I was
healthy
going to
sleep.
bring that up too. When you said that sleep is like, it's a paradoxical problem, because changing your outlook and how you're managing stress in your life is going to help you sleep better. But before that happens, in an earlier stage, that's also a way to combat stress and anxiety, is by letting yourself get more sleep. I'm throwing my roommate under the bus, but he said I could talk about him. So he has the same problem where he had this pervasive series of maladaptive sleep issues where he has a fine time getting to sleep, but he just didn't let himself. And then it got to the point where he was getting sick all the time because he wasn't letting himself sleep, and then he couldn't get to sleep, and now he has this problem where he doesn't know how to fix it. So you can be proactive about helping your stress and anxiety levels by actually allowing yourself to drink water, get some exercise, allow yourself to have good sleep. I have problems with that too, so I don't know if that's something with
That's part
resilience,
of it.
but that's a
Well,
huge...
that's the resilience
Right,
thing.
yeah.
right.
Resilience is about doing what your grandmother told you or should have if she was a good grandmother. We eat healthy food, we get a decent amount of sleep, and research says 7 to 8 hours. Most people don't do that. Americans don't sleep enough, and graduate students sleep less than most Americans. But you're stealing from yourself if you aren't trying to get 7 to 8 hours a night, and there'll be exceptions, but that really should be your target range. Resilience is about staying well hydrated, getting some exercise, just things that each one by themselves isn't going to be like this huge life changer, but cumulatively it helps give us some buffer against what life throws at us.
And one thing I have to throw out there from the neuroscience point of view is sleep is also a massive agent in memory. So if you look at memory differences with sleep patterns, people who have normal 7 to 8 hours of sleep, or just a regular sleep cycle, depending upon which one you're on, have massively larger memory capabilities if you have a normative sleep schedule compared to a non-normative sleep schedule. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, I think there's a lot of research to support that, and it's an important thing to remember. Although if you're having trouble with sleep, I don't want you to feel anxious about that. I mean, because I've had students say that as well. Like, okay, I know I should be eating well, exercising, and sleeping enough, and I can't fall asleep, so I'm anxious about that. And I know that I could be eating better than I am, but it's hard to get to the grocery store in the winter, and I know exercise is a good thing, but it's cold outside. These aren't necessarily excuses. I mean, they're explanations of how it is that this is going on, and so it's worth thinking about, okay, what can I do to help this? So I'm just kind of throwing that out there. I don't want anyone to be kind of beating themselves up because they're not doing all the things that Doug said, and he's right, that your grandmother would say. There's ways to think about it, and in fact, if you're having a lot of trouble, come and see us in student counseling. But but it's just worth knowing. And the reason I was asking you all about how you know if you're stressed and what helps is, this seems obvious, but it isn't to most of us. It's good to recognize it, to know what are the cues when you're getting overly anxious. What are the things that tell you that you're having a hard time, and what are the things that help? It's just good to remember those things. What's helped in the past? Is there any way that I can build on those strategies now, even if it seems like I'm in a very different circumstance than I was in college or before I came to graduate school? What used to help, and is there anything like that now? And the other thing I would say, I would just ask you guys, you recognize when you're getting anxious and stressed. What makes it worse? Anybody? You have a sense of, okay, I know I'm anxious, and this is what I tend to do, and it almost always makes me feel even more anxious. Yeah.
I would say that not breaking the pattern, like not taking a step back and seeing myself in that situation. So if I'm too much in it, then I just let it, take control. I continue with those, losing a full day of what was supposed to be work and it became something else.
Yeah. So breaking the pattern
Breaking
somehow,
the
whatever
pattern.
that might be.
Yeah, and
doing
I
something.
it's interesting because in the past 2 days, I just had a deadline today, so, which means I almost didn't sleep last night and finished about 10 pages of a paper overnight, so, that wasn't fun. And the thing is that I found myself in the last couple of days going into that pattern of finding really interesting things to do while I was supposed to be
Yeah.
doing something else, and at the height of the interest, I would just shut down that window and go back. Kind of
Good to know.
force
Yeah.
myself to take control, and I felt that by doing that, although there was a frustration there, because I really wanted to be doing that instead of this other thing, there was kind of a relief of just
Right.
making that instant choice,
Yeah.
and,
Mhm.
you know, okay, I can
Mhm.
And that helps.
focus. So that was kind of, in a sense, it was a breaking of that pattern.
Yeah, definitely was.
Yeah.
I think people often find that big blocks of time are both a luxury and a burden. You know, think how many Saturdays you've blown away, you know, when you get up in the morning, think, I'm gonna do this. And, you know, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're thinking, well, I've done all these other things, but I haven't done what I set out to do. And so I think, trying to just engage a little bit, I think stepping back, catching your breath is one way, using a version of the timer that Ann talks about. You know, sometimes people find it helpful just to set a timer somewhere in their house. Maybe it's on your computer, your phone, your microwave. You own one, you got it at Walgreens for $7. You know, but you set it for 15 minutes to say, what am I gonna get done? I'm just gonna do something for 15 minutes. And I can just kind of get the stuff flowing a little
Right.
bit.
Right. So, and again, I think many of us can relate to the things we're all talking about, but I encourage you to think about what works for you and what
Yeah.
doesn't work for you. We all have we all, you know, have different rhythms, we have different experiences in the world. So it's worth thinking about without judgment toward yourself, you know. How do I know when I'm anxious? What are the things that help when I get anxious? What are the things that don't? For example, you know, I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm a big advocate for people talking about their feelings, you know. I think it's true. Sometimes it's like vampires in the light. You know, it's like I say it out there, I put it out there, and it's not quite such a big dinosaur anymore. You know, it's like I can handle it. On the other hand, so it may be calling up your best friend or your mom or your sister and when you're feeling anxious is helpful to you, but there may be those people that you know every time you talk to, you feel more anxious. You know what this is like. It's like and so, and yet somehow that we can get drawn to that. It's like you can sort of get sucked in, you know, or, you know, some students will say, I feel much better working in groups because everyone around me working helps me, you know, doing writing, you know, helps me stay motivated. Other students will say, it makes me really anxious to be with groups because I just see what everyone else is doing and I feel I'm not doing as well. So there's no right or wrong, but try to recognize what are the things, what are the circumstances that are helpful to you? What are the activities that are helpful to you? Who are the people that are helpful to you? Not who should be, but who really is. Like when I talk with this person, I just tend to feel better. When I talk to this other person, it's not that they're meaning to trigger this in me, but I find I feel even more anxious. Right? I think it's useful to, again, in terms of thinking about time and the relationship between managing time and managing anxiety. Review your obligations from time to time. You know, it might be, you know, make sure they're still good for you. You know, it might be that reading group that you go to every Thursday night that used to be great. You find that now as you're going, it isn't as much fun as it used to be. I feel more anxious when I leave, or it just isn't the best use of my time anymore. Maybe I want to try to do something different, right? You know, maybe I have a regular Skype date with my friend that lives in California, but maybe the time isn't good for me anymore. Or maybe it is, right? I'm just saying we get into routines, and I think it's really worth just checking in with yourself and saying, is this something that's helpful to me, and is this a good use of my time? And if not, let them go.
You might even be letting it go for a while, you know.
Right,
Maybe you
right.
step back because I'm doing a project and, you know, you go back to
Right.
your study group or whatever.
Right, right.
I was going to add this earlier. So this is obviously from the data miner.
Mhm.
Human attention lasts about 40 minutes. So stepping back is a huge thing.
Yeah.
You can really only attend to something for about 40 minutes until, if you keep doing it, you are destroying your productivity. And so what ends up happening with anxious individuals is that, and this, with any domain of anxiety you're talking about, is a lot of people, this happens to me too, is that you want to plow through something so much that you hit 40 minutes, you don't allow yourself to disengage, and then you just destroy your program of work. And it's 3 a.m, you're still trying to write, and like,
Yeah.
you don't even, sometimes I'm writing and I don't even know what I'm writing anymore, and you wake up and it's because you're not disengaging from the task. So setting a timer for like, I usually do it like 40 minutes and then 10 minutes. 10 minutes, I like grab a harmonica and play and screw around, and then go back for 40 minutes and then do it all again. And that's something personal for me that works, but I do know that the ceiling on human attention across the board is about 40 minutes until you start to sort of just disintegrate and cry.
Right. And
I'm all about the crying.
And I would say another way to reduce your anxiety, though, is, I want to say, I realize it's counterintuitive when you have a lot to do and the deadline is looming. But if you can find a way to stop working when you're engaged with what you're doing, so before you start to cry, or even before you hit the end of your ability to attend, plan to stop. Stop when you're engaged with your work. If that means you can only work for 20 minutes or 10 minutes, do that. And try the experiment. If you'll see, you'll be able to focus much better. Stop when you're engaged with, when you're still engaged with it. Know what you're going to do when you come back to it. So you're stopping while you're involved, leave it, go away, do something else, play a harmonica, or even do something different, and then come back to it. And it will help you, well, one, it will reduce the negative association with your work, which makes it hard to come back to,
Exactly.
right?
Mhm.
And also it will reinforce that this is a pleasurable thing, and we go towards things that are reinforcing, and we go away from things that are aversive. So the more ways that you can keep your work something that is pleasurable for you, the more likely you are to stay in it. Does that make sense? Right?
What Anne's describing, though, can be really hard to do
Oh,
when
yeah.
you're on a roll. You think, well, I don't want to stop.
I know.
And the risk, of course, is what both of you are talking
Yeah.
about, is that, you know, you're going to burn yourself out, and that leaves you with a body memory, you know. So the next time you go around to starting, you're going to be a little bit, you know, trying to protect yourself, because you don't know if you have the wherewithal to keep from putting yourself in a painful situation again. What this means, though, is the first time you do what Anne's suggesting, it's a leap of faith. You know, how many times have you stopped something and you got back to it, you know, a week later, you know, or I'm going to go out for a walk, and then you walk to Kansas, whatever. You know, like, we stop things and we don't know if we'll ever come back. So you sort of have to demonstrate it to yourself
Yeah.
a few times. But once you do, once you show yourself, oh, I can actually stop and start, and I can feel good about it, and oh my God, I'm even more productive, then you sort of have data that's going to make it easier to do that. But at first, it's really a leap of
It is
faith.
really hard. And I would say likewise, if you sit down to do some work and you think this is a good time, it's my peak concentration time, the environment is good, I'm rested, I had just enough to eat, so I'm full, but I'm not too full. I did some, everything should be working for me so I can get into this. If you sit there during that kind of environment, or any kind, and you're not able to get into it within 20 minutes, stop. That you don't want to sort of keep yourself in the chair, keep pushing beyond when the frustration is going to start to build, and what begins to happen is anxiety begins to build, contributes to getting overwhelmed. Like, as I said, the biggest reason any of you procrastinate is because you're feeling overwhelmed. The harder it is to get to it. So you want to save yourself that pain. If you don't get into it within 20 minutes, make a choice to stop, go do something else, and then make a plan to try it again later.
I was gonna ask where the crippling procrastination comes from, because I don't intend to avoid,
No, of course not.
you know, but I do, and I consciously do. And so I don't think that my anxiety is coming from the procrastination. I think it's quite opposite. Is that true? I mean, do you see that? I mean, how does procrastination work with this?
Well, so I sort of touched upon it earlier. It's not acute instances, but avoidant behavior surrounds anxiety. And it's something that you learn, and then the more anxious you get, you're essentially reinforcing a pattern of behavior such that you have negative associations with it, and you're avoidant, and you build the association, and it just keeps going. Yeah. What I do, and this is completely anecdotal, no research whatsoever. Anytime I feel anxious about something, I drop to the floor and do push-ups. So my heart rate, my blood pressure, everything, I just attribute to exercise, and then I get back to my work. That's how I stave it off. And then you look okay in grad school.
You gotta
So,
keep your, yeah.
Sorry, you can correct me.
Well, so the next time
I
I'm
think
anxious,
that's a
I'm going
great
to call you and have
idea.
you drop to the floor.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, I think that you're right, that anxiety and procrastination are absolutely linked. And so when we talk about, like we run a procrastination group at our clinic, or we do workshops, we always talk about it with respect to anxiety, because that's really, like I said, no one is avoiding the work because they absolutely don't care at all about it. You know, but sometimes it's hard to know, like what, I know you've all had this experience where you thought you were, again, in a good space to get some work done, and then you think, oh yeah, but I didn't, I'm just really quick gonna respond to that note I got from my professor to say I can come to office hours, and oh yeah, I should water the plants, I see they're kind of getting dry over there, and you know, I'm a little hungry, maybe I should make a cheese sandwich, you know, and then the phone rings, and I take the call, you know. I in a way I'm doing it because I really want to avoid the work, but you know, it's so pretty soon the time goes by, and it isn't as though, and this is why I think it's tricky, and why I'm asking you to be very self-reflective about when anxiety is starting to build, that you don't always know that you're anxious. It's like pretty soon the time seems to have evaporated, and then the anxiety is coming from, I didn't do the work. So it feels like it's the opposite. It's sort of like, oh, it's you know, 2 o'clock, and I was going to start working at 11, and then now I'm really anxious. So, you know, and how did that happen? And so, you know, what I would say is, without being judgmental toward yourself, and I want to really stress that, because beating up on yourself, it doesn't feel good, you don't deserve it, but it doesn't help. It actually gets in the way.
Yeah.
Because if I'm busy telling myself, I sat down to do this work, and instead I did all these other things, I'm not really very smart anyway, how did I get in here? It must have been a mistake, or I'm going to be a big failure. I mean, you know, these are the things that we start to think, you know, and I know you do. And so not only does it not help, but it's not accurate. I mean, I can't say with certainty if any of that stuff is true of you. I don't think it is, but it isn't accurate in this situation. That's not why you stop working. And so when you're busy, you know, when you come up with that kind of a disposition, then you don't think any further about, well, what did happen? If you can look at it a little more scientifically, a little more objectively, and say, well, what was it about that reading that might have been bothering me? Or, you know, how can I objectively look at the way I'm planning my time so that I can make changes that are attainable and realistic rather than what I think I should be doing? You know, I want to try to find out what happened so I can do something different, and I want to try to do that dispassionately. Do you know what I mean? So that, you know, if I place the blame on just my weak character, then I don't have any, I'm stuck with me, you know, I can't do anything differently. But if I try to look at what are the circumstances, then there may be things I can change. Does this make sense? And I realize it's kind of automatic, so you have to kind of slow yourself down. And I brought a little list of statements you can say, you know, this is helpful to some people, not to others. It feels phony at first, but if you practice it, sometimes it can help. That if you find yourself saying, I have to, you know, I have to finish this, if you can replace it with I choose to. I must finish with when can I start? You know, I must finish this by the end of next week. It's like, no, when can I start working on this? Replace this is so big with I can take one small step. And again, you just have to pay attention to what you're thinking without judging yourself. I must be perfect with I can be human. I don't have time to play with I must make time to play. And again, I recognize that you just try to noticing what you're saying and instructing yourself to say something different to yourself can feel sort of superficial at first, but if you recognize that these kinds of thoughts are the ones that are triggering what is actually, I would speculate, a kind of addendum to what you are aware you're thinking, and at the addendum is the catastrophic thought. So it's not really, I have to finish this by next Tuesday. It's, I have to finish this by next Tuesday. Oh no, I should have started 2 weeks ago. I'll probably never finish. I never do finish anything. I'm a terrible student. I'm a terrible scholar. I'm probably not going to graduate. I'll never get a job anyway, and I'm going to end up living in a park bench somewhere and be a failure to everyone. You know, and it sounds silly when it's because it's not. It just happens like that. And then the emotional reaction is a reaction to that catastrophic addendum, right? So if you can catch it, if you can catch that I have to and say I choose to, then you've started, you've found a way to have a corrective.
Sorry, just to ask
Let's
about
go ahead.
at the very beginning, the focused attention task idea. If like you're in a library, you can't play a harmonica. Did you have specific things that you've heard in your previous experiences about students doing to kind of like get to do examples of those?
Yeah, so I am such a Western guy, but I hate a lot of things. Like, if somebody was like, hey, do you want to go to this meditation class? I'd be like, nah, and I'd flip the table. But things like focused attention tasks like meditation, breathing, and expressive writing, like just grabbing a sheet of paper and writing about something, it doesn't care if you hate writing. If you just do it, it completely alleviates anxiety, or at least the behavioral effects of anxiety. You don't have to be writing specifically about the task itself, but it helps just your ideas about what you're going to be doing. The person that actually ran the study, I think, tried to code for like the types of words that you use, and showed that like the amount of words that you use relating to the task that you would be doing, the increased number of words about the task showed increased performance. So essentially, you're getting all of your ideas out there, and so that way you have your ability to inhibit from irrelevant stimuli when you're doing a task. This is very sciencey terms. But your ability to basically get the thoughts that you don't want in there when you're doing a task out increases the more you just sort of get your thoughts out there on paper. I like doing breathing tasks. That's really recent research shows that you see the same behavioral effects if you just sort of like sit there and just focus on like breathing in and breathing out. And that's not even like what you commonly think of as like psychological. That might actually just be like a physiological effect, which is really, really cool. The other day I bought a guitar. I took a little break and I bought a guitar online before starting something. So, I mean, you really just have to find what works for you, or what I should say, all of these things would work, but your propensity to do them over a long period of time. Mm-hmm. So, like, if you're not going to sit down and do a breathing task, but like, oh yeah, I could write about it, then I would say, like, stick with that. Because then you're going to be more likely to do it in the future. It was funny, I gave a talk last October, and the audience asked if, since writing works, should I just always keep a journal and a diary? And I said no. Because the only evidence that we would have would say that this only really works if you do it right before you have, a task that you, like, we only have evidence to say that, like, it only works if you do it right before an instance of anxiety or, like, an event that would cause you anxiety. So maybe from a scientific point of view, it might actually eliminate the effects if you're just always sitting there writing. So I would say if that's something that you'd want to do, just limit it to, like, right before you know you're going to be, like, challenging yourself with a task. Not threatening yourself with a task.
Challenge yourself. And I would say also, exactly, I would support the points that you're making, but I would also say find the things that work for you, like maybe knitting, drawing. Think of the things that are soothing to you, that you enjoy doing, and do those things. Keep them handy, and something to break the either the physical sensation of anxiety or this kind of cognitive stream that can be disruptive. And the sort of cognitive challenges I was suggesting, it's really good to write those down. I will work with students doing that sometimes. Like, just write down what you're thinking and don't censor yourself. Notice what you're telling yourself, and then come up with some challenges for those thoughts, and with the focus on accuracy. It's not about positive thinking, it's about what's an accurate description here. An accurate description is there's a lot of work to do in a short amount of time, and I'm concerned about how I'm gonna get it done. I mean, that may be accurate. The part that isn't accurate is the stuff, again, the catastrophic piece at the end. And so if I can come up with a reasonable challenge, it can bring my anxiety down. Know the things that help you calm down. Breathing is a good one, I think, and that's something you can do, and no one can see if you're doing a little breathing
Nobody knows,
exercise. A really easy one is, what I will tell students sometime is, we don't have to do this right now, but is to take in a deep breath and hold it as long as you can, and then let it out as slowly as you can. And do that 3 times in a row. And then just sit for a minute. And so anxious breathing is coming from your chest, and more relaxed breathing is coming from your abdomen. And so sit and put your hand right there and just focus on your breathing for a moment or two. So deep breath in, hold it as long as you can, long breath out 3 times in a row, and then just sit for a minute with your hand and just notice your breathing.
This is, sorry, do you mind?
No, go
Go
ahead.
right
This is a little anecdotal, but just so that you said something about like being the only anomaly within the room. What I do is I wear a heart rate monitor, and I really like playing games with myself. So what I do is when I need to take a break from something, I literally sit there and I look at the monitor and I try to see how low I can get my heart rate. And
Challenging
it's
yourself,
challenging.
right?
Yeah, it's challenging, and it's like letting me focus on my breathing, and it's just a sort of fun little game that I play with myself. And I know that's something that I can do over and over again, and I enjoy it. So it's a little.
Well, I wanted to add, building on both those things, to also pay attention to what doesn't work.
Right.
And there's so many things that we do so habitually now, and
Yes.
most of them are the techie things. We are so
Right.
screen obsessed that, we check our phone, we check Facebook, we watch a movie, we look at the news, and it's a distraction. It's different in some ways from what we're doing, but it doesn't provide a lot of what these other things do. It's not
Right.
physical, it's not push-ups, it's not the guitar, it's not knitting, and it's not, it may even, I don't know if there's data or not, but it may even be more stress-inducing, just that experience. So I think that's a whole nother talk.
Oh,
I
with
think.
Yeah.
using interfaces.
Yeah,
So you show, if anybody's actually interested, you do see, if you're, depending upon what hormone you're measuring, when people engage in interfaces, their stress levels go up almost immediately. And it's usually because you're checking something that makes you socially accountable to somebody else. Like you're on Facebook, and like all of a sudden you have this interaction with the world where you find yourself accountable in like this massive social setting, and you have other work to do, and you're sitting there. But yeah, people's anxiety and stress goes up when they sort of link up to the world.
Just a quick question about this point. I guess then what doesn't constitute focused attention task? Like, is there some more technical definition that I'm missing? Because it seems like anything that we're doing that's a break can require some focus for our attention to do. So
Yeah,
where's
so
the line drawn?
yeah, no, that's a good question. So usually when we talk about focused attention tasks, it's limiting your focus to one specific activity, but also inhibiting from irrelevant information. So breathing's a good one because it makes you focus on your breathing, and you're not thinking about anything else. What was the other one? So expressive writing, you're thinking specifically about the writing, and whatever you're writing about is what you're focused on, and you're inhibiting yourself from thinking about other things. Meditation's the same thing. You focus on a point in your mind, or whatever your meditative strategy is, and you're inhibiting from thinking about other things. The problem is, like, you can't really think of something like, I would assume you can, I don't have evidence of this, but I would assume you couldn't think of like Facebook as a focused attention task, because you have pop-ups and you have people pinging you and you have all these things going on that it's actually encouraging you to take in irrelevant stimuli from like posting on a status, and all of a sudden somebody posts a funny cat video and you're watching that, and it's focused attention that you're focusing your attention on Facebook, but what you're actually doing has no relevance to focusing your attention whatsoever.
Right, the same with like reading the news online and things
Yeah.
like that. I mean, it's incredibly engrossing and distracting at the same time.
I'm just confused about the writing as a focused attention task. You're saying it could decrease in its effectiveness as a stress reducer if you do it consistently?
That's something that I don't know.
Okay.
I was just saying, so somebody had asked that and they said, well, should I just keep writing? And I said, well, all we really have evidence for is if you do it before an instance of when you know you're going to be anxious about something. So you have a math test coming up, or if you have to write a paper. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that frequently when professional writers have been interviewed about their work, they say the first thing they do when they get up in the morning is they sit down and they write for 30 minutes. It may not even be structured, but they start the day doing some writing,
Right.
and that's consistent with what we're
Mhm.
saying.
Right. poet, and it was relatively successful, interviewed once, and he said that that he wrote every day, and that if he wrote every day, then once a week he would write something that was not terrible, and once a month he would write something that was, pretty good. Once a year he would write something he was pretty proud of, and once a decade he'd write that masterpiece, once a lifetime. But I mean, sort of the idea of the repetitiveness of just doing the task eventually, as opposed to, and we know this is, if we sit down to write and the idea is I want to write something great, it's really hard to write something great. Where if I sit down and I just write and I keep doing that, and I, assuming I've got some ability, which you all do, eventually something comes out that's great. But I'm not putting that pressure on the first sentence, which is the thing that's going to stop me from being able to write the first sentence.
With respect to writing as a focused attention task, is it more preferable to write by hand, do you think, or?
I actually
That's a
don't
good
know.
question.
I asked the guy who ran the study, and he didn't know either. So whether you type or you actually physically write. I think there was a lab at MSU that wanted to run the study, but I don't have any data back from that yet. So. Sorry, when it comes to data, I'm just like, I can't answer that question.
It's a really important question, though. I
It
think.
is.
Yeah.
It's, it's a different modality than typing, so there may be some value in that physical
Uh-huh.
movement. There's some stuff, I'm not familiar with this research, but I know there's some stuff about, whether children are doing work at keyboards or whether they're physically writing what they do. And neurologically, it's proposed that it's better for the neurological development at that age to be writing. But in terms of it being good just for your well-being, I don't know, I would lean to writing. But doing some sort of capture of words versus none at all, maybe typing is better than not doing it at all.
And she starts typing. Sorry.
Other thoughts or comments or questions? Should we say a little bit about sleep? We were going to circle around to that. That'd be all right. Because I think there's, very quickly, some people use this kind of onerous term sleep hygiene to refer to what's healthy sleep. And I think a good way to capture the essence of what's good sleep hygiene is to think about what do college students do, and then do the exact opposite. They drink caffeine indiscriminately, they have no rhythm to their sleeping, their beds are a piece of furniture in their dorm rooms, so their associations to their beds are all sorts of things that aren't sleep, that maybe are also sleep. Sleep is so much about rhythm, so trying to have a target bedtime every night, even though as students you won't always hit it, is helpful because your body prepares for sleeping. And as you prepare for that time, exercising less so you let your body kind of cool down. Working out is great. Don't do it at 10 o'clock. Do it middle of the afternoon. Some people suggest we should avoid screens in the last few hours before you go to bed. Both the brightness and maybe the color tones are neurostimulative. I know that if my phone goes off in the night, it's like a flash bulb went off in my head, when I look at it. And so it's maybe more helpful to try and stay clear of your screens if there's other things you can do. Having preparatory rituals for bed, that sounds like a big term, but it's, what do you do? The same thing, you put on the clothes that you wear when you go to bed, you brush your teeth, you have certain things. Your body notices that and starts to get ready for going to bed. And finally, the thing about the bed as a piece of furniture, ideally, you want your bed to be a place that you associate with calmness and sleeping. So you should reserve it for sleep and sex, and not have it be where you have a snack, where you watch your movies, where you read, talk on the phone, because then you associate work with bed, and all those things sort of added together are supportive of good sleep. Have we finished what we came for, Conrad?
I just want to are you guys anxious, worried, concerned? How can we help?
Anxious to apply this and get going?
Yeah. Yes, we fixed it. I mean, certainly I would say it's important to recognize if what's happening is beyond sort of ordinary anxiety, You know, if you find that I know you guys probably know this, but if you find that you're consistently trying to sleep, you're oversleeping, you're undersleeping in a way that isn't typical, and this goes on for a while, you wanna pay attention to that. If the anxiety is unrelenting, you know, you wake up and you're already feeling anxious, and it just doesn't go away. If you find that you're not doing you know what the things are that you like to do, but you're just not doing them, you're not seeing people, and this is going on for, you know, we all have down days, but this goes on for more than a couple of weeks, come and see us, because you might be getting really depressed. And one of the most insidious thing about depression is that it makes it impossible to do the things that if you could do, you could feel better, and the more you don't do, the harder it is. Or there could be more going on, and these are the kinds of things we can help you with at student counseling. So putting a little plug for our service, that if you're not, you know, if the habits that you would like to be doing are not happening over time, and you're noticing changes, let us help you with that, because it's very treatable, and it can definitely be helped, but you don't want to get yourself into a deeper hole than you need to be. So
It can also seem counterintuitive, I think, to think, well, if you're anxious, you can't be depressed, but we often see people, it's almost more like a mood disruption than you're just anxious or you're just depressed, because they co-occur all the time, and we can help with that.
yes. Any other questions or thoughts before
I'm
we
thinking here, I don't know.
I think we have a little bit of time.
Yeah. So I don't know if everybody here is English native speaker. This is something that has been kind of one of the things that have been, I think, this cyclic kind of thought that has been going in that negative direction. So the first of all, the overwhelming volume of reading that is kind of was really surprising at first. Then it just I heard from several people that that's the way things are done here, and then that there are ways of like strategic reading, or like, you know, you find different ways, and I'm like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
all right, so now it makes sense. Like, not everybody goes through it, but then, you know, go to class, and the sense is that everybody's got all the reading down. So I'm like starting to feel, you know, I'm not doing this right. And then after, I don't know, some time in a conversation here or there, you start getting that people are not really getting all their reading done. It's not like that. It looks like it, but it's not. And you're like in that sense, like, well, I'm not doing this right, and I'm not going
Everybody
blind,
else
I'm
is,
not.
yeah.
And the whole not being native speaker kind of
I
gets
know.
the thing like
It makes it harder.
speed of reading is not working. So there's it. What I'm getting at is that it gets to the point where the choices of getting that little 50-minute block or 40-minute block of reading done, there's a kind of a lack of, there's a hopelessness. Like it's
Yes.
like, okay, I got my block down. I've done it before. But I know it's not gonna work. Like I know I'm gonna sit here with my timer, and you know, there's this kind of,
Sense of
and then there is me looking at myself like from kind of outside the situation, like, you know, what are you doing? It's such a weird conversation to be having with myself about you got to work on your, you know, kind of perspective or.
It can be hard to know if you're setting reasonable goals, especially when you have a perception that somehow other people are able to do all this reading, and so it becomes harder to set reasonable and realistic goals for yourself. And then when you sit down and aren't able to even begin to get through it all, it does create a sense of kind of hopelessness. And I think, yes, I think when English isn't your first language and you're doing a lot of reading in English, you know, it's a hard thing. And you know, again, I would say if that continues to be a problem, it sounds like the answer for everything is come to the student counselors. But honestly, that's something I do a lot with students, is work on effective reading and just helping people learn how to recognize what's reasonable and what's, you know, an attainable goal. you know, reading about 10 pages of really difficult material in an hour is an attainable goal. Reading 100 pages is not. And that's if English is your first language and you're reading. And yet we have so much reading to do that because I have to get so much reading done, I'll make a plan that I've got to read, you know, 100 pages in a time period that isn't really possible. And then when I start to not get through that, creates a sense of being discouraged, which leads to getting overwhelmed, which leads to procrastination and a kind of sense of hopelessness. So believe me, you're not alone in not getting reading done. I'm sure everyone is that.
I think it's even more complicated, additionally complicated when your expectations or beliefs are that everybody else has read everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's coming down from, you know, faculty who have been doing this for 25 years. They maybe have read everything, but, you know, you've only been here, you know, a few years or maybe even less, or even longer. You know, it's not realistic to think you would have done that,
Right.
you know.
Did we address your question?
Yeah.
Good.
We all have imposter syndrome the first couple of years. I don't know, I mean, it seems like that's what you're describing a little bit, but
Well,
I
yeah,
had
yeah.
the same experience. I got here, and you think that nobody knows what they're talking about. Everybody acts like they do, and nobody does. Everybody, I don't know if I should say that on camera or not, but yeah,
No, but
you're not alone.
It's not. I wouldn't get to that point. It's just that it's more human than this superhuman
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And that's very
Comforting.
comforting.
Yeah.
Thank you. And just enabling a little bit of compassion towards yourself as well,
Yes,
because otherwise,
exactly.
how, you know, if I'm beating over my head, you know, it's just, I'm not gonna be able to be more productive.
Exactly, and I do think that it's hard because there is a culture, you know, I think where it can feel wrong to admit that you're having a hard time, particularly with the academics, to say it's hard to get through this because we're supposed to all be stars, and no one wants to be perceived as a weak intellect or anything close to that. And so people don't talk to each other as much as they could in a way that would be reassuring and more humane for all of us. Because there is a sense I have to at least act like I'm really on top of it, even if I go home and curl up in a ball and sit in my closet, you know, because I'm so upset. But I have to at least seem like I'm on top of it. And so it's kind of hard sometimes to get people to let down. And yeah, it's true.
This is a school where, you know, critical thinking is so valued that the dark side of that is, you know, people tend to get really good at you know, rewarding you by telling you what you did wrong. Well, that was really good, but here's where it could be better. You know, and I think intentions are good, but it can sometimes contribute to a culture that has less sort of praise and support, and that can be hard.
Yeah, I mean, we all see lots of very, you know, very smart graduate students who come in feeling like, I think I'm pretty smart, I'm interested in it. And then we see them again in year 5 or something, and they don't think they're smart. It's sort of like, oh, I hope I can get a job because I'm barely squeaking through. And we know that's not the case, but there is a way that self-confidence and self-esteem, which is so tied up with intellectual success, can take a beating because of that. And, so we're here for you if you're having trouble.
Parting comments? Final questions?
This is very useful.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
hope you continue to do it on a more expansive nature. I think that the unique anxiety that I've experienced in Chicago, I think I had to deal with it before this conversation could really be useful. If I'd have had this in orientation in September, I probably would not have valued it.
Yeah, you have
the
to
way
live
I
it
do
a
now.
bit.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago it would have been better. But no,
Sorry.
it's very encouraging. So that's a challenge.
Yeah, well, good luck to all of you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Appreciate your contributions.